honor, choice, and the turning point of the frontier. The sun had just begun to rise over the rugged hills when Elias Harper stepped out of his small cabin, stretching his arms and taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. The frontier town of Redstone was waking slowly, the smoke from chimneys curling up into the sky mingling with the soft golden light. Birds called to each other from the trees lining the edge of the settlement, and the distant clatter of a wagon on the dirt road reminded him that life, though quiet, was moving steadily forward. Elias was a young man of 22, lean but strong, with eyes that seemed to carry the seriousness of someone much older. His hands, calloused from years of helping his father with the land, were a testament to his hard work and quiet patience. Growing up in Redstone had been anything but easy. His father, a man of strict principles and unwavering honesty, had taught Elias that life was not measured by wealth or fame, but by the choices a person made when no one was watching. Honor, loyalty, and integrity were words that held more weight than gold in their home. His mother, gentle and kind, had balanced his father's sternness with warmth, teaching Elias that compassion was also a form of strength. He had learned early that the frontier demanded more than courage. It demanded careful thinking, respect for others, and the ability to make decisions that could affect not just oneself, but an entire community. That morning, as he adjusted his worn leather coat and tightened the straps of his satchel, Elias felt the familiar tug of restlessness in his chest. Life in Redstone was comfortable in its simplicity, but the call of the unknown had begun to grow louder with each passing day. The newspapers and travelers' tales spoke of new territories opening up to settlers, fertile land waiting for someone willing to work it, and opportunities that promised more than this small town could ever offer. Yet, with opportunity came risk. Stories of harsh winters, unforgiving terrain, and confrontations with those who sought to take advantage of newcomers were common. Many had left, never to return, their dreams buried beneath the unforgiving soil of the frontier. Elias had spent long nights thinking about his future. He could continue helping his father on the farm, marry a local girl, and live a predictable life. It was safe, secure, and honorable, but the thought of never testing his own limits gnawed at him. The frontier called to him like a whisper carried on the wind, full of danger, yes, but also full of possibility. His heart ached with a desire to see more, to prove himself, and to create a life that he could look back on with pride. His decision, however, was not one he could make lightly. The Harper family had lived in Redstone for generations, and every choice a son made reflected on the family's reputation. Elias knew that leaving would not just affect him, it would bring concern and worry to those he loved. His father had always warned him that ambition without honor was meaningless, and that true courage was not measured by the willingness to chase wealth, but by the ability to stay true to one's principles when faced with hardship. The weight of this responsibility pressed heavily on Elias, but it did not deter him.
Over breakfast, the small kitchen smelled of fresh bread and strong coffee.
His mother had prepared the meal with a quiet, knowing look, as if she understood the storm of thoughts swirling in her son's mind. She spoke gently, asking about the fields and whether the animals had been tended properly. Elias answered in his usual measured way, careful not to reveal the full extent of his internal struggle. His father, seated at the wooden table with his hands clasped over a chipped mug, watched him intently. There was no need for words. The elder Harper had always been able to read his son's thoughts, and Elias knew that his father would offer guidance only if asked, preferring to let his children discover the answers themselves. After the meal, Elias walked through the town, the sound of his boots crunching on the dusty streets grounding him in the present. Redstone was small but vibrant in its own way. The blacksmith's hammer rang rhythmically, echoing against the wooden walls of the workshop. Children chased each other around the square, their laughter carrying over the quiet murmurs of adults trading news and goods. The general store was busy with merchants discussing shipments and bartering over prices, while at the edge of town, the school teacher prepared for the day's lessons. It was a simple life, but it was rich with community and trust, things Elias knew he would miss if he chose to leave. As he walked, he encountered old friends and neighbors, each greeting him with smiles and questions about his plans. Some noticed the faraway look in his eyes and asked teasingly if he was daydreaming about adventure. Elias smiled politely, masking the intensity of his thoughts. He felt a mixture of excitement and fear. Excitement for the possibilities that lay beyond the hills, and fear of the unknown dangers that the frontier promised. He thought of the people who had left before him, some returning with stories of success, others broken by misfortune. He wondered which path he would follow, and whether he had the strength to endure the trials ahead. By midday, Elias reached the outskirts of the town where the land began to open into rolling hills and dense forests. He paused to look out over the horizon, letting the wind whip through his hair. The sight stirred something deep within him, a mixture of longing, determination, and a quiet sense of destiny. He imagined the challenges he would face, crossing rivers swollen with spring runoff, navigating forests where paths were uncertain, and confronting those who might threaten his safety or test his morals. Yet he also imagined the rewards: land to call his own, the chance to shape a community, and the pride of knowing he had carved his place in the world through courage and honesty. In that moment, Elias made a silent vow to himself. He would take the journey, not for wealth alone, but to live a life that honored the values his parents had instilled in him. He would face every challenge with integrity, and every choice he made would reflect the honor he had been taught to uphold. It would not be an easy path, and he knew there would be moments when fear and doubt threatened to overwhelm him. But he also knew that growth, true growth, came only when one stepped beyond the familiar and faced the unknown with determination. As evening approached, Elias returned to the cabin, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. The town settled into a quiet rhythm, the bustle of the day fading into the gentle sounds of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves. He prepared his small pack, selecting only the essentials: a few tools, some dried food, a sturdy blanket, and a worn journal in which he recorded his thoughts and plans. Every item was chosen with care, each representing not just necessity, but also his readiness to face the challenges ahead. Sitting by the fire that night, Elias reflected on his life in Redstone. He thought about his family, his friends, and the community that had shaped him. He knew that leaving would test not just his skills, but his character. The frontier would not forgive mistakes, and every decision would carry weight. But he also felt a quiet excitement, a sense of purpose that filled him with energy. For the first time, he realized that his journey would not just be about survival or success. It would be about the kind of man he wanted to become. As the firelight flickered across the cabin walls, Elias felt a sense of peace. He had made his choice, and though the road ahead was uncertain, he was ready. The frontier called, and he would answer, not with recklessness, but with courage, honor, and the quiet determination of someone who understood the true value of choices. He closed his eyes, letting sleep take him, knowing that with the first light of dawn, his journey would truly begin. The morning air was cool as Elias stepped out of his cabin, the faint smell of dew and earth filling his lungs. Today he would begin the long journey beyond Redstone, moving toward the unknown land that promised both opportunity and challenge. His pack was heavy on his shoulders, yet he carried it with steady determination. He glanced back at the town one last time, seeing the familiar shapes of the rooftops and the winding streets. His heart tightened for a moment, thinking of his parents, friends, and the life he was leaving behind. But he knew that growth and discovery often required stepping into the unknown. Elias's path took him through the rolling hills and forests that stretched beyond Redstone. The trail was rough, marked only occasionally by the footprints of other travelers. Early on, he encountered a small stream. The water was cold and clear, reflecting the morning sun like scattered diamonds. He knelt to drink, feeling the chill of the water against his palms and the smooth stones beneath them. As he moved onward, he reminded himself to stay alert. The frontier demanded constant awareness. The beauty of the landscape could conceal dangers if one was careless. Yet he also felt a sense of wonder, a quiet appreciation for the world beyond the town, untamed and alive. After several hours of walking, Elias came across a small clearing where he decided to rest. He sat under a large oak tree, taking out a piece of bread and some dried meat from his pack. The solitude was calming, giving him time to reflect on the lessons his father had taught him. Every decision matters, Elias, his father's voice echoed in his mind. Honor is tested not in comfort but in challenge, and courage is shown not in recklessness, but in knowing what is right and following through. These words gave him strength. He thought of the travelers' tales he had read, of men and women who had risked everything to carve out lives in the frontier. Many had failed, but those who succeeded had done so because they understood more than just survival. They understood the value of honesty, perseverance, and compassion. As he continued, the terrain grew more difficult. Rocky paths and dense thickets slowed his progress, and the sun climbed higher in the sky, making the day warm and draining. He kept a steady pace, careful not to exhaust himself too early. At midday, he reached a river wider than any he had crossed before. Its current moved swiftly, and the water roared over rocks with a force that made him pause. Crossing it would not be simple. He searched along the riverbank until he found a fallen tree bridging the banks. It was slippery and unsteady, but it was the only way across. With careful steps he made his way over, arms outstretched for balance, heart pounding with each precarious movement. When he reached the other side safely, he allowed himself a small smile, feeling a surge of confidence. Hours turned into days, and Elias began to encounter other travelers on the trail. Some were families moving with wagons, others were lone individuals seeking fortune or a new beginning. Each meeting required judgment and careful interaction. Elias had learned that trust in the frontier was valuable but cautious. People could be friendly and helpful, yet desperate circumstances sometimes pushed them toward dishonesty. He approached each encounter with respect and honesty, offering assistance when it was safe and appropriate, and learning from each person he met. In one such meeting, he helped a family repair a broken wagon wheel. The gratitude in their eyes reminded him that acts of kindness, even small ones, could create bonds and open doors in unexpected ways. One afternoon, as the sun began its descent, Elias reached a small settlement by the side of a stream. The settlement was modest, with a few cabins and a central communal area. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the sound of children's laughter reached him before he even saw the people. Among the settlers was Clara, a young woman with a gentle demeanor and eyes that reflected determination and intelligence. She was tending to a small garden, humming softly to herself, but immediately noticed Elias as he approached. Their first exchange was cautious, polite, and simple. He asked for directions to the nearest safe camp, and she offered both guidance and food, insisting he rest before continuing his journey. Over the next few days, Elias found himself returning to the settlement, helping with small tasks and learning from the people there. Clara shared stories of her own journey, leaving a comfortable town life to serve frontier communities and help those in need. She spoke of challenges she had faced, moments of fear and doubt, and how perseverance had guided her through difficult times. Elias listened closely, feeling a growing respect for her courage and wisdom. In turn, he shared his own motivations and the values instilled by his parents. Their conversations were honest and unguarded, and a friendship began to grow, one built on mutual respect, shared ideals, and the understanding that life on the frontier demanded more than skill. It demanded character. The days at the settlement were a lesson in patience, resilience, and observation. Elias noticed that every choice mattered, no matter how small. The way he spoke, how he offered help, even the diligence with which he tended his own supplies, all contributed to the impression he made on those around him. He began to understand that the frontier was not just a place of physical challenge, but of moral and emotional growth. Every action, every decision, tested his ability to remain true to himself. It was one thing to survive alone in the wilderness, and another entirely to navigate the web of human relationships with honesty and honor. One evening, as the sun set in a burst of orange and purple over the distant hills, Elias and Clara walked along the stream, speaking quietly. She asked him what drove him to leave his home, and he spoke of the lessons from his father, the desire to live a life of purpose, and the call of the unknown. Clara listened, nodding with understanding. "The frontier will test you, Elias," she said, "but it will also show you who you are. Keep your values close, and you'll find your way." Her words resonated deeply, reinforcing the resolve that had carried him this far. He realized that friendship, guidance, and mutual respect were as valuable as any tool or provision he carried. The following week brought new challenges. Storms swept across the land, turning trails into mud and rivers into torrents. Elias learned to read the weather, to seek shelter in time, and to ration his supplies carefully. He discovered that resilience was not merely physical, it was mental. Each obstacle he overcame gave him a sense of accomplishment, but also a reminder that the frontier demanded humility and adaptability. On one particularly harsh evening, as he set up a small camp under the shelter of pine trees, he reflected on how far he had come. Just a few weeks ago, the journey had seemed daunting, but he was learning, growing, and discovering the strength within himself. Amid the daily trials, moments of beauty reminded him why he had chosen this path. The sun rising over misty hills, the quiet majesty of a deer drinking from a stream, or the laughter of settlers sharing stories by a campfire. All of these moments inspired him. They reminded him that life, even in hardship, contained richness beyond material gain. Elias began to feel a sense of belonging, not tied to a single town, but to the larger frontier and the people who shared its challenges and hopes. By the time Elias prepared to leave the settlement and continue his journey westward, he had changed. The road had tested him in ways that no classroom or town life ever could. He had encountered friendship, learned patience, and understood that honor was proven not in words, but in choices. Clara's encouragement, the settler's gratitude, and the quiet confidence he had built within himself strengthened his resolve. He knew that more difficulties awaited, but he was no longer a young man unsure of his path. He was a traveler, a student of life, and someone committed to living with integrity. As he stepped onto the trail again, the wind at his back and the sun rising high, Elias felt a mix of anticipation and calm. He knew the frontier was vast, unpredictable, and at times unforgiving, but he also knew that he had gained skills, courage, and a moral compass that would guide him. Each step forward was a promise to himself and those who had supported him, to act with honor, to face challenges with determination, and to never lose sight of the values that had brought him this far.
And so, with the horizon stretching endlessly before him, Elias Harper continued his journey.
The land was vast, the journey long, and the future uncertain, but he moved forward with steady confidence, knowing that every day, every choice, and every challenge was shaping not just his path, but the man he was becoming. The trail stretched ahead, winding through valleys that grew deeper and hills that rose steeper as Elias moved further west. He had left the small settlement behind, carrying with him not only supplies but also a growing sense of confidence and purpose. The days had taught him that the frontier was not just about survival, it was about judgment, patience, and staying true to one's principles in moments that tested both courage and character. Each morning, the sun would rise with golden warmth, but by evening, shadows reminded him how vast and unpredictable this new world could be. After several days of traveling, Elias arrived at a larger frontier settlement. The town was busy, bustling with newcomers, traders and settlers trying to stake their claim. Wooden buildings lined the main street, smoke rising from chimneys, and the air carried the mixture of baking bread, burning wood, and the earthy scent of horses and livestock. It was a place full of potential, but Elias quickly realized that it was also a place of tension. People here were not just fighting the land, they were navigating human ambition, greed, and the occasional moral compromise that came with competition. From the moment he entered the settlement, Elias felt the weight of choices pressing upon him. A powerful landowner named Jedediah Crane seemed to have influence over nearly every transaction, his men often reminding settlers that cooperation with him could ensure safety, while refusal could lead to exclusion or difficulty.
Elias observed quietly, noting how people responded.
Some compromised their own principles to gain favor or protection, while others resisted quietly, hoping to hold on to their values. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken questions. How much should one sacrifice to survive? When is it right to compromise, and when is it necessary to stand firm? Elias found lodging in a small inn, a modest wooden building that smelled of wood smoke and fresh-baked bread. The innkeeper, a cheerful woman named Martha, welcomed him warmly, offering a room and advice about the settlement. Over the next few days, Elias explored the town, helping where he could and observing the delicate balance of survival and ethics. He noticed settlers being asked to give favors or pay fees to gain access to supplies. He saw neighbors whispering about others' decisions, wondering if loyalty and honesty could survive in a place driven by necessity and ambition. One evening, while walking through the settlement, Elias encountered Clara again. She had traveled ahead and was volunteering at a small infirmary that served the community. Her presence was a reminder that the frontier was not only about survival, it was about service, compassion, and standing for what was right. They spoke quietly near a creek, the sound of flowing water masking their voices from the busy streets. Clara told him that in this settlement choices would be tested more severely than anywhere he had been before. She warned him that some settlers had already compromised their principles for convenience or safety. Elias listened intently, feeling the tension grow inside him. He knew that his own decisions were becoming more complicated. The town required not just strength and resilience, but also careful judgment and ethical courage. He realized that his principles were being tested in new ways, by peer pressure, by the allure of comfort, and by the subtle threats posed by those in positions of power. Each day brought small decisions that added up, whether to speak up when injustice occurred, whether to help a neighbor at personal cost, whether to accept advice from those whose motives were unclear. One morning, as Elias helped unload a shipment of supplies, he noticed that Crane's men were taking more than their fair share, leaving the rest of the settlers with less than needed. The settlers whispered among themselves, hesitant to confront the landowner, fearing retribution or being forced out of the town. Elias felt a surge of indignation. He remembered the lessons from his father and the guidance Clara had shared. True honor meant standing up when it was difficult, even when the outcome was uncertain.
Yet he also understood the danger.
Confronting Crane directly could jeopardize his position and safety in the town. Over the next few days, Elias carefully observed the dynamics, seeking allies and understanding the motivations of the people around him. He realized that while the frontier demanded courage, it also demanded strategy. He began speaking privately with settlers who shared his values, encouraging them to act collectively and support one another. Small acts, sharing resources, protecting weaker members, speaking honestly in negotiations, began to form a subtle resistance to Crane's dominance. The sense of purpose that grew from these efforts strengthened Elias, but it also reminded him how difficult it was to maintain integrity in a world where compromise often seemed like the easier path. During this time, Elias and Clara spent more hours together, discussing the challenges of the settlement and sharing their observations. Clara's perspective was practical and grounded. She reminded Elias that sometimes small, patient steps could achieve more than immediate confrontation. She also emphasized the importance of maintaining personal integrity regardless of others' actions. Their conversations were a mix of strategy and reflection, a combination of moral guidance and practical planning. Through these discussions, Elias began to realize that leadership on the frontier required not just bravery, but also wisdom, empathy, and the ability to inspire others without forcing them. One afternoon, a dispute broke out between settlers over a piece of land near the edge of the settlement. Words escalated into shouting, and there was a risk that the disagreement would turn violent.
Elias stepped forward calmly, mediating between the parties.
He listened carefully to each side, acknowledged their concerns, and proposed a compromise that respected the rights and needs of both parties. The settlers, initially skeptical, began to trust his judgment, recognizing that his fairness and consistency were rooted in genuine integrity. It was a small victory, but a significant one. Elias realized that standing firm in principle could earn respect even in a tense and challenging environment. As weeks passed, Elias began to understand the complexity of the moral crossroads he now faced. Crane's influence remained a looming presence, and daily choices became increasingly nuanced.
Was it enough to act honestly in small matters, or did true honor require confronting injustice directly, even at personal risk?
Could he rely on the support of those around him, or was he ultimately responsible for standing alone? Each evening, as he returned to his modest room, he reflected on these questions, writing thoughts and observations in his journal. These reflections became a guide, helping him navigate not just the physical challenges of the frontier, but the ethical challenges that defined the community he hoped to serve. By the time winter approached, Elias had earned a reputation as a fair and capable member of the settlement. People began seeking his counsel, respecting his judgment, and recognizing the consistency of his character. He had also seen firsthand that compromise, while sometimes necessary for survival, could erode trust and respect if it conflicted with core principles. The frontier was teaching him a lesson his parents had long impressed upon him: that honor was not simply a word, but a series of choices made daily, often under pressure and in uncertainty. One particularly cold evening, as snow began to fall lightly across the settlement, Elias and Clara walked to the edge of town, looking out over the valley. Clara's expression was thoughtful. "The challenges here will only grow," she said. "You will have to make decisions that could change everything. The frontier does not forgive weakness, but it rewards those who are true to themselves."
Elias nodded, feeling the weight of her words.
He knew that the time would come soon when he would face a decision that tested everything he believed in. A choice that could shape not just his life, but the lives of everyone in the settlement. Despite the looming tension, Elias felt a quiet sense of readiness. The moral and ethical challenges of the settlement had strengthened him, teaching patience, discernment, and courage. He had learned that leadership was not about domination, but about guidance, example, and integrity. The friends he had gained, the alliances he had formed, and the small victories he had achieved prepared him for the greater challenges ahead. Each day reinforced the truth that the frontier was as much a test of character as it was a test of endurance and skill. As the night fell, Elias returned to his room, looking out at the snow-covered rooftops. The settlement was alive with quiet activity: the murmur of families indoors, the faint sound of livestock in the barns, and the distant cry of a lone wolf in the hills. He thought of the coming days, knowing that the moral crossroads he had anticipated was near. The choices he would face would not be simple, but he was determined to act with honor, wisdom, and courage. He closed his journal, placing it carefully on the small shelf beside his bed. The frontier had already taught him more than he had imagined: about people, about morality, and about the strength that comes from knowing one's values and standing firm. With Clara's guidance, the respect of the settlers, and his own growing confidence, Elias Harper felt prepared to face whatever decisions awaited him. The path ahead was uncertain, the challenges formidable, but his heart was steady, and his purpose was clear. The frontier was testing him, and he was ready to meet it head-on, not just as a traveler or settler, but as a man committed to honor, integrity, and the difficult choices that define true character. The morning dawned clear and cold, the sunlight glinting off the frost that coated the roofs and fields of the frontier settlement. Elias Harper awoke with a sense of purpose that had been building over weeks of observation, reflection, and preparation. He knew that the challenges ahead would test everything he had learned: the lessons of honor from his father, the guidance from Clara, and the moral strength he had cultivated on the road and in the town. Today was different from any other day since he had left Redstone. The choices he would make could change the course of not just his life, but the lives of everyone in the settlement. The day began with the usual morning tasks: feeding animals, checking supplies, and helping neighbors with chores. But beneath the routine, tension had begun to build. Word had spread that a group of settlers from a neighboring town, struggling with hunger in the harsh winter, had been denied fair access to the settlement's resources by the influential landowner, Jedediah Crane. Some of Crane's men had blocked the newcomers, threatening them with force if they tried to claim even the smallest share. The situation was tense, and the settlement watched silently, uncertain who would act. Elias felt a surge of responsibility. He had spent weeks observing, listening, and learning. Now he knew it was his moment to act. He gathered a few trusted settlers, including Clara, in the small town square. Their breath formed clouds in the cold air as they spoke quietly but with conviction. Elias outlined a plan to help the newcomers while maintaining safety for the town. "We can't let fear or greed guide us," he said. "We must act with fairness, courage, and honor. If we do, others will follow, and justice can prevail without needless conflict." His words were calm, yet carried a firmness that inspired confidence. The settlers listened, hesitant at first, but gradually nodded in agreement. Elias knew that leadership was not about commanding fearlessly, it was about showing clarity, courage, and integrity. The plan required coordination. Some settlers would guide the newcomers to temporary shelters, while others would gather food and supplies. Elias himself would meet Crane directly, speaking not with anger or threat, but with honesty and reason. The thought of confronting the landowner filled him with nervous anticipation. He knew that standing for what was right could provoke opposition, but he also understood that true honor demanded action, not silence. With Clara by his side offering calm encouragement, Elias felt a quiet strength grow within him. As the newcomers approached the settlement, they were cautious, their eyes wide with apprehension. They were families, parents with children, weary from the journey and frightened by the uncertainty they faced. Elias greeted them warmly, explaining the plan and reassuring them that they were safe. The fear in their eyes slowly lifted as he guided them to the temporary shelters, his calm demeanor offering hope. It was a small act, but one that carried great weight. In the frontier, small acts of courage and kindness often shaped the outcome of larger conflicts. The confrontation with Crane was inevitable. Elias approached the landowner's cabin, his boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. Crane emerged, tall and imposing, with an air of authority that had kept many settlers cautious for months. "Elias Harper," Crane said, his voice carrying both surprise and mild amusement. "I hear you've been busy. What brings you here?" Elias met his gaze steadily, aware that his actions now would define not just his own future, but the settlement's sense of justice. "I'm here to speak for the newcomers," Elias said clearly. "They have a right to shelter, food, and fair treatment. We can solve this without conflict, but it requires honesty and fairness. I ask that you allow them access and let us help them safely." Crane's eyes narrowed, studying Elias with a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. "And what if I refuse?" he asked. Elias's voice remained calm. "Then I will still help them, and I will do so with the support of those who value fairness. I do not wish for conflict, but I will act in what is right." Crane studied him for several tense moments. The cold wind swirled between them as silence hung over the scene. Then, with a slow nod, Crane said, "You are bold, Elias Harper. I cannot say I approve, but I cannot stop you either. Make your way." Elias felt relief, but also a quiet sense of responsibility. The victory was not in Crane's concession alone. It was in the choice to act with honor rather than intimidation, courage rather than fear. With Crane's reluctant approval, Elias coordinated the effort. Settlers moved swiftly, guiding the newcomers to shelters, distributing food and tending to those in need. The day was long, and the work exhausting, but Elias never faltered. He encouraged others, ensured fairness, and reminded everyone that their actions now would define the settlement's character. The sense of unity that grew during the effort was profound. People who had once doubted each other began to trust and support one another, inspired by the example of integrity and courage set by Elias. As evening approached, the cold deepened, and the settlers gathered near a central fire to warm themselves. The newcomers expressed gratitude, their faces alight with relief and hope. Clara stood beside Elias, smiling quietly, recognizing the importance of his leadership and the fairness he had maintained. It was a moment of quiet triumph, not one marked by wealth, reward, or recognition, but by the knowledge that right had prevailed and lives had been protected. Elias felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that this day would be remembered not for conflict, but for courage, fairness, and honor. That night, as the settlement settled into calm, Elias walked to the edge of town, looking out at the valley beyond. The sky was clear, stars scattered across the horizon like tiny lanterns. He reflected on the day's events, understanding that the choices he had made were the defining moments of his journey. Each decision had tested him, not just physically, but morally and emotionally. He had faced fear and uncertainty, yet had acted in alignment with his principles. The frontier, he realized, was not simply a place to survive. It was a place where true character was revealed through action. Elias also thought about Clara, whose presence had been both support and guidance, her words encouraging patience, compassion, and strategy, had been instrumental in helping him navigate the challenges of the settlement. He understood that leadership was never solitary. Success depended on collaboration, trust, and shared values. The strength he drew from Clara and the community reinforced the lesson he had learned. Honor was not abstract, it was lived in every choice, every word, and every act. Over the following days, the settlement began to feel different. The successful effort to protect the newcomers had strengthened bonds, created trust, and fostered a sense of shared responsibility. People who had once been hesitant or fearful now acted with confidence, inspired by the example of Elias and those who supported him. Even Crane, though still distant and cautious, showed signs of respect. Elias understood that while not everyone would embrace the same principles, consistent integrity could influence and inspire others, often in ways that words alone could not achieve. The turning point had been reached not through confrontation or aggression, but through careful action guided by moral clarity. Elias reflected on the lessons of the journey so far, that the frontier demanded more than strength and endurance. It required courage in the face of ethical dilemmas, compassion for those in need, and the wisdom to act decisively while maintaining honor. He realized that this day, this effort, would shape not just the settlement's present, but also its future. One evening, as he recorded his thoughts in his journal, Elias wrote about the importance of choices. He reflected on the balance between caution and courage, between patience and action. He understood that the frontier would continue to present challenges, and that each day would require the same careful consideration and moral clarity. Yet he also felt a quiet pride, knowing that he had acted in alignment with his values, and that the settlement had responded with trust and collaboration. The night was peaceful, the wind soft and steady, and the fire in the center of the settlement cast a warm glow over the gathering of people. Families shared stories, children laughed, and the sense of community was tangible. Elias walked among them, offering quiet guidance and support, feeling the satisfaction of knowing that honor and courage had made a real difference. For the first time, he fully understood what it meant to stand at the turning point, not as a passive observer, but as someone whose choices shaped outcomes, inspired others, and upheld the principles he had carried from Redstone. As he returned to his modest room that night, Elias felt a mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment. The frontier had tested him in ways he had never imagined. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the pressure of difficult decisions. He had acted not for reward, but because it was right. And in doing so, he had proven to himself and to the settlement that courage guided by honor could overcome fear guided by greed. The lessons of the day would remain with him forever, shaping the man he was becoming and preparing him for the challenges that still lay ahead. Elias Harper had reached the turning point of his journey. The frontier was vast and unpredictable, but he had learned that integrity, courage, and fairness were more powerful than fear or force. The choices he made today would resonate for years, influencing not only his own life, but the lives of those around him. And as he lay down to rest, the stars above shining like witnesses to the day's deeds, he knew that the frontier had revealed something essential. True honor is lived in action, and the right choice, though often difficult, has the power to change the world. The first light of dawn painted the horizon in soft shades of orange and gold, and Elias Harper stood outside his cabin, breathing in the crisp morning air. The settlement lay quietly beneath the hills, peaceful and alive, a small community that had grown stronger through the trials of the frontier. The events of the previous months, the journey from Redstone, the challenges of the wilderness, and the moral decisions that had defined his time in the settlement had left an indelible mark on him. He felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, knowing that the choices he had made had shaped not only his own path, but the lives of many others. The settlement had changed. Where once there had been fear and uncertainty, now there was trust and cooperation. People worked together, shared resources, and supported one another through the harsh seasons. Families who had arrived with nothing now had shelter, food, and hope for the future. Children ran freely through the streets, their laughter echoing off the wooden buildings. Even Jedediah Crane, the once dominant landowner, had begun to respect the settlers' resilience and the strength of character displayed by Elias and those who followed his example. It was a community that had learned that honor, courage, and compassion were more valuable than fear, control, or selfish ambition. Elias walked through the town, greeting neighbors and checking on the progress of new homes being built. Each person he spoke with shared a story of how the settlement had helped them survive, adapt, and even thrive in the harsh frontier. He listened with humility, realizing that leadership was not about personal recognition, but about service. The lessons he had learned from his father, reinforced by Clara's guidance and the challenges of the journey, had shown him that true honor is reflected in actions that benefit others, not in words or rewards. The quiet gratitude of the settlers was more satisfying than any praise he could have imagined. Clara had become an inseparable part of this life, her strength, intelligence, and compassion shaping the settlement alongside Elias. He managed the infirmary, tended to the sick, and offered guidance to those struggling with the demands of frontier life. Together, they had become a team, their friendship and partnership grounded in shared values, trust, and respect. Elias often reflected on how her encouragement had guided him through moments of doubt, reminding him that courage without wisdom could be reckless, and that honor required thoughtfulness as well as action. Their bond had grown steadily, rooted not only in companionship but in the shared commitment to build a community based on fairness, empathy, and integrity. The turning point in the settlement's history had come months before, during the crisis with the newcomers from the neighboring town. Elias had faced a choice that many would have avoided, risking conflict, personal safety, and reputation. He had acted decisively, not with anger or force, but with fairness and courage. That decision had shaped the settlement's culture, setting a standard for behavior and guiding the community in difficult times. People had learned that integrity could influence others, that actions grounded in honor inspired trust, and that courage guided by principles had a lasting impact far beyond immediate circumstances. Winter arrived, blanketing the land in snow and testing the community in new ways. Supplies ran low, paths became difficult, and the harsh weather threatened to make life unbearable. Yet the settlement, strengthened by months of cooperation and mutual respect, faced these challenges with determination and resilience. Elias worked alongside the settlers, helping to gather firewood, repair homes, and ensure that everyone had enough to eat. He led by example, showing that even small acts of service could strengthen the bonds between people and inspire others to act with kindness and responsibility. Each day brought new trials, but also new opportunities to demonstrate courage and integrity. One evening, as snowflakes drifted silently across the landscape, Elias and Clara sat by a fire, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. Clara spoke softly about the changes she had witnessed, the way people had grown more confident, more compassionate, and more willing to act for the common good. "The frontier is harsh," she said, "but it also reveals what people are capable of. You've shown that honor isn't just a word. It's a choice made every day, in every action."
Elias nodded, thinking about the long path from Redstone to this settlement and the lessons learned through hardship, observation, and careful decisions.
He understood now that true success was not measured by wealth, land, or recognition, but by the lives he had touched and the principles he had upheld.
Over time, Elias became a mentor and guide for younger settlers who were new to the frontier.
He taught them not only practical skills, building homes, tending crops, navigating the wilderness, but also the importance of integrity, fairness, and courage. His stories were filled with lessons from the journey, illustrating how every choice mattered and how actions guided by honor could shape outcomes in ways that mere strength or cleverness could not. The younger generation listened eagerly, inspired by the example of someone who had faced challenges honestly and emerged stronger, not through force, but through careful, principled action. The settlement flourished in the years that followed. Homes were built, crops were harvested, and families found safety and stability in a world that had once seemed harsh and unforgiving. Elias and Clara worked together, helping others, sharing wisdom, and guiding the community through challenges with patience and compassion. Their partnership became a symbol of what the frontier could achieve when courage, honor, and collaboration were placed above selfish ambition. People began to speak of the settlement as a place where integrity mattered, where fairness guided decisions, and where courage was celebrated not through reckless acts but through thoughtful, principled choices. One spring morning, Elias stood on a hill overlooking the valley, watching as children played near the river and settlers worked in the fields. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the long trek from Redstone, the encounters with danger and uncertainty, the moral challenges of the settlement, and the turning point that had defined his role in the community. Every struggle, every choice, had taught him something essential: that true honor is lived in action, and that the right path is often the hardest to follow, but the most rewarding in the end. Elias reflected on his parents' lessons, recognizing how deeply their guidance had shaped his life. His father's insistence on integrity, courage, and responsibility had laid the foundation, while his mother's kindness and compassion had shown him the power of empathy. The frontier had tested these lessons, sharpening them into tools that allowed him to navigate moral dilemmas, inspire trust, and lead by example. Clara's presence had reinforced these values, reminding him that strength is enhanced by partnership and that integrity thrives when shared with others who are committed to similar principles. As he returned to the heart of the settlement, Elias witnessed the small but profound changes that had taken root. Neighbors helped each other without hesitation. Disputes were resolved peacefully through discussion and fairness, and the settlement had developed a sense of unity that had once seemed impossible. The lessons of honor, choice, and courage had become embedded in the culture, guiding behavior, fostering trust, and creating a community that could withstand the harsh realities of frontier life. It was a living testament to the power of principled action and the importance of moral courage. In the quiet moments of the evening, Elias would often sit by the fire in his cabin, writing in his journal and reflecting on the journey. He documented the challenges, the victories, and the lessons learned, not for recognition, but as a record of the growth that came from choices made with integrity. He understood that the frontier would continue to test settlers in the years to come, and that new challenges would arise. Yet he felt confident that the principles he and Clara had helped instill would guide the community through adversity, just as they had guided him on his own journey. Years passed and the settlement grew into a thriving community, admired by neighboring towns for its resilience, fairness, and cooperative spirit. Elias Harper's story became part of the settlement's history, told and retold as an example of courage, honor, and the importance of principled choices. Families who had once been strangers now considered each other neighbors, friends, and collaborators in building a life that was safe, just, and full of opportunity. The legacy of the journey was clear. Integrity, compassion, and courage had the power to transform not only a single life, but the lives of many, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond the immediate moment. Elias often walked the paths of the settlement, observing the work being done and the lives being built. He watched children learn, neighbors assist one another, and families thrive, and he felt a quiet satisfaction that went deeper than pride. It was the satisfaction of knowing that choices guided by honor had created something lasting, something meaningful. He reflected on the turning points, the struggles, and the decisions that had brought him to this moment, understanding that every trial had been an opportunity to act with courage and integrity. In the end, Elias Harper knew that his journey was about more than survival or success. It was about living a life aligned with principles, inspiring others through example, and creating a community where honor, fairness, and courage were valued above all else. The frontier, once a place of uncertainty and danger, had become a place of legacy. His story, and the story of the settlement, was a reminder that true honor is measured not by recognition, but by the choices made in the face of difficulty, the lives touched through action, and the positive influence one leaves behind for others to follow.